All right, so you know those crimes that just kind of get under your skin, like stories that you can't shake?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
The Zodiac Killer, I mean, it's going to be one of them.
Right.
So today, we're going deep dive style and sift through everything. We're talking the hard facts, the timeline, and those big questions that still hang over this whole thing.
Yeah, it's really become, like, almost mythical in a way, this whole case, like dark mythology. It's kind of the top of the list when you think about unsolved mysteries, at least in America. For everyone listening, this is about a killer, still unidentified, who really terrorized Northern California back in the late 60s.
And not just for a short time either. I mean, between December 68 and October 69, we know for sure he killed 5 people right there in the Bay Area. And it's not even like he's stuck to one type of place or victim. It's rural roads, it's the city, it's the suburbs, it's couples out on dates, even a taxi driver just trying to make a living.
It's interesting, too, like the image the killer tried to create for himself. In his letters, he suggests he was older, like 40s, maybe 50s at the time. And from witnesses, plus his own writings, you get this picture. White guy, heavy-set, brown hair. But then there's the ciphers, right? That points to someone pretty smart, pretty devious.
No doubt.
Yeah.
And that all feeds into why it's possibly, as they say, the most famous unsolved murder case in American history. It's like it seeped into our culture. You've got tons of amateur detectives still trying to figure it out. And these attacks, they weren't isolated. We're talking Benicia, Vallejo, Napa County, even San Francisco itself. 7 victims in total. Tragically, 5 of them died, but 2 survived. And their stories are, well, I can't imagine.
Those survivor accounts, they're crucial, even if there are, inconsistencies sometimes. That firsthand experience gives investigators something real to work with, even if it's messy. And the name Zodiac. That wasn't some police nickname or anything. That came straight from the killer, the letters he'd send to the newspapers. And these weren't just like quick notes. He threatened more killings, even bombings, if they didn't publish his stuff right on the front page.
I bet that created a lot of fear, not just for the police, but for everyone.
Uh-huh.
And then the motive he claimed was just weird, right? This idea of collecting slaves for the afterlife.
Yeah.
And on top of that, you've got the cryptograms, the puzzles in his letters, 4 of them. 2 have been solved, which gives us some insight into his messed up thinking, but 2 remain unsolved.
Those unsolved ones, they're like a giant screw you to everyone trying to figure this out. They've stumped people for decades. And the last confirmed communication, at least from someone claiming to be the Zodiac, was 1974. In that letter, he says he's killed 37 people, even threw in a possible link to a 1966 murder, Cherie Joe Bates, down in Riverside. But that one's been heavily debated whether it's actually connected or not.
So many possible victims over the years. And of course, the suspects. That list has gotten long too. Officially, the police only ever named one guy, Arthur Lee Allen, but he died back in '92. More recently, Gary Francis Posey, who died in 2018, has become a big name thanks to this group called the Case Breakers. It's a case that's grabbed attention worldwide, right?
Oh, totally. Something about how bold the crimes were, plus the whole cryptic communication thing, it's fascinated people everywhere. Weird thing is, the San Francisco PD, they actually marked it inactive back in 2004, but then reopened it before 2007. And it's not just them either. It's still an open investigation in other places too. The California Department of Justice, the FBI, various local police departments, sheriff's offices. It spans jurisdictions.
So let's actually get into the victims, the ones we know for sure. It all starts December 20, 1968. David Arthur Faraday, 17 years old, and Betty Lou Jensen, just 16, shot and killed on Lake Herman Road out near Benicia. Their first date. It's awful.
Awful. And then months later, July 4th, 1969, you have Michael Renaud Magot, 19, and Darlene Elizabeth Farron, 22. They were attacked in the parking lot of Blue Rock Springs Golf Course in Vallejo. Darlene died, but Michael survived. His account, even though it changed some over time, was super important for the investigation at the time.
Surviving something like that, it had to change him. Then September 27, 1969, Brian Calvin Hartnell, 20, and Cecilia Ann Shepard, 22, attacked at Lake Berryessa up in Napa County. Cecilia died from her wounds, but Brian lived through the stabbing. What's chilling about this one is they saw the guy beforehand. He had this weird hooded outfit on with a white crosshair symbol, like a target, on the chest.
Yeah, Lake Berryessa, the details are really messed up. And to make it worse, the guy, he uses a knife to draw that same symbol, the crosshairs, on Brian Hartnell's car door. Then he writes the dates of the other attacks, adding by knife. Then he calls the Napa County Sheriff's Office himself to report it. And the kicker, fingerprints from the phone booth, they don't match anyone they have on file.
It's like he wanted to be caught, but not really. Then the last confirmed victim, Paul Lee Stein, 29, a cab driver, shot and killed on October 11, 1969 in Presidio Heights, San Francisco. They took his wallet, his keys. But a piece of his shirt, that shows up later in one of the Zodiac's letters. Direct link to the murder.
So those are the confirmed ones. But there are others that investigators have looked at as possibly connected, though it's less certain. You got Robert Domingos, 19, and Linda Edwards, 17. They were shot back in June 63 near Lompoc, California. The way they were killed has some similarities to the Faraday and Jensen murders, so it makes you wonder if maybe the Zodiac was active earlier than we thought.
Pushing the timeline back, huh? Then there's Cherio Bates, 18 years old when she was stabbed in Riverside, October 66. That one came up later because the Zodiac himself sent a letter claiming he did it. But Riverside PD, they've always said no, it wasn't him.
The timing there is important. 66, that's years before the Bay Area stuff started happening. But the brutality of it in that letter, it keeps the debate going. Then you have Kathleen Johns. She was 22, said she was abducted in March of 1970 near Modesto. She got away with her baby, thankfully. Later, she identified a police sketch of the Zodiac as the guy who took her. But there were some things that didn't quite add up in her story, which understandably made investigators hesitate a bit.
I mean, everyone was on edge back then. Any weird encounter, you'd immediately think Zodiac. And lastly, there's Donna Lass, 25 when she vanished in South Lake Tahoe, September 1970. A postcard that seemed related to her disappearance turned up later. And just recently, in 2023, they identified her skull. Big development, but we still don't know how she died or if it was the Zodiac.
So let's put all this in order. The timeline of how it all unfolded, especially how the killer communicated with everyone, it's wild. It starts, like we said, December 68, Faraday and Jensen, a double homicide, no real leads at first.
And then boom, July 4th, 69, Mago and Farron are attacked. But then that phone call to Vallejo PD, that's what really gets me. The guy claims both that attack and the previous murders. And get this, the call is traced back to a phone booth right by Darlene Farron's house and the sheriff's office. It's like he was right there mocking them.
So bold. Then, August 1st, 1969, 3 letters, almost identical, sent to the Vallejo Times-Herald, the San Francisco Chronicle, and the San Francisco Examiner. Each one had that 408-character cryptogram and the threat to kill 12 people that weekend if they didn't print it on the front page.
Try to take control, scare everyone. 3 days later, another letter to the Examiner. This is the one that starts, "Dear Editor, this is the Zodiac." He answers some questions Vallejo Chief Stilts had asked for, basically confirming it was him, at least in his own mind.
And then, get this, a week later, August 8th, 1969, that cryptogram gets solved. Donald and Betty Hardin, a husband and wife, they cracked it. The message, it had some bad grammar and all, but it showed he was obsessed with the afterlife, this whole collecting slaves thing. He also mentioned The Most Dangerous Game, that short story. But his name, he didn't give that up.
I bet he was annoyed they solved it. Then Lake Berryessa, September 27th. The hooded guy, the symbol, the stabbings, writing on the car door. It's all so performative, you know.
Totally. And then, another call to report the crime. Napa County Sheriff this time, another phone booth. But again, the fingerprints, no match. A couple weeks later, October 11th, Paul Stein is killed. Kids who saw it happen gave a description, but the initial police radio call, it said the suspect was black when the witnesses said white. That messed up the whole thing.
What if they'd gotten that right? Could have been different. Officer Fook, he actually saw someone matching the later description, but because of the bad info, he didn't realize. Then, October 14th, a letter to the Chronicle. It has a piece of Stein's shirt in it, proof it was him, and then another threat, to shoot kids on a school bus. Just awful.
It's like the worse it got, the more he enjoyed it. October 20th, 1969, someone claiming to be the Zodiac calls Oakland PD. He wants F. Lee Bailey or Melvin Belly, those big-time lawyers, to go on Jim Dunbar's TV show. Belly does go on, and a guy calling himself Sam calls in, says he's the Zodiac. But cops who'd heard the real guy's voice say, nope, that's not him.
The whole thing was such a media circus. November 69, another letter with that 340-character cryptogram, unsolved for like 50 years. He also sends a 7-page letter saying 2 cops actually stopped and talked to him after he killed Stein. That matches up with Officer Fook, makes it even more complicated.
December 69, another letter to Belly, another piece of Stein's shirt. Then March 1970, the incident with Kathleen Johns, which might be him, might not be.
April 70, more letters. That 13-character cipher where he's like, my name is blank, and a diagram of a bomb he says he's going to use on a school bus. He also brags about killing cops. Later that month, a greeting card talks about an explosion and wants nice Zodiac buttons, like he thinks he's a brand or something. That card also mentions shooting someone in a parked car with a .38, which some people think might be connected to the murder of Sergeant Richard Raditich, but the cops at the time said no way.
It's crazy how much he wrote, and it was always creepy stuff. June 70, the button letter. July, the one about Kathleen Johns. Then late July, the littlest letter. He's quoting the Mikado now, talking about torturing his slaves in paradise. And there's this thing called the Radian Hint about a map of Mount Diablo.
That radiant hint is interesting. People really dug into that. Like Gareth Penn, he had this theory about the angles on the map pointing to the attack, suggesting he was choosing locations very deliberately. October 70, a 3x5 card shows up. Words cut out of newspapers, 13 holes punched in it. Later that month, a Halloween card to Paul Avery, the Chronicle reporter who was all over the Zodiac case. He says, "Peekaboo, you are doomed." That's what really got Avery looking into the Chorizo Bates murder down in Riverside.
So now it's going beyond the Bay Area. March 71, letter to the Los Angeles Times. He says he did the activity in Riverside, meaning Chorizo Gates. Riverside still doesn't buy it, though.
March 71 again, the Pines card to Avery. A lot of people think that refers to Donna Lass disappearing near South Lake Tahoe, widen the possible victim pool. Then things are quiet until January 74. A letter comes in, praises the movie The Exorcist, updates his kill count to 37, says me equal 37, SFPD equals 0.
Spooky reappearance after all that time. Later in 74, a few more letters, one about the Symbionese Liberation Army, though no one's sure if it was really him, another one complaining about the movie Badlands, and then there's the Red Phantom letter, which is about some columnist. People still debate if that was really the Zodiac.
So then from 78 to 1990, there are these random letters and cards that pop up, but most of them have been debunked as hoaxes or just not really connected to the original guy. Makes it even harder to sort through everything. But then, December 2020, huge news. They finally decipher that 340-character cryptogram after 51 years. The message, it's more the same, obsessed with the afterlife and wanting slaves.
Cracking that code was a big deal, especially for all the people who'd been working on it for years, you know? Then October 2021, this group, the Case Breakers, they come out and say Gary Francis Post is the Zodiac. They say they have forensic evidence plus anagrams they found in the letters.
That got everyone talking. And then in 2023, word came out that the FBI had actually taken the Casebreaker stuff and added it to their investigation. They're also looking into a possible DNA match between Post and some hair found at the Chorizo Bates murder scene. So, see what happens with that.
So officially, how's the investigation going? Well, they got some DNA from saliva on the Zodiac's letters, and they've used that to rule out some guys. Arthur Lee Allen, Robert E. Hunter Jr., both of them were considered strong suspects at one point, but the DNA doesn't match.
Especially Allen. He was like the suspect for a long time. That DNA thing really throws a wrench in it. Shows how important that physical evidence is. Back in 2018, Vallejo PD tried to get DNA from the stamps on some of the letters. That just shows how they're still trying to use new tech to solve this old case, even though we haven't heard anything about those results yet.
All right, let's talk suspects. Arthur Lee Allen, like we said, he was the big one for a while. Lots of circumstantial stuff. He knew about the most dangerous game, had lots of knives, acted in ways that kind of fit the Zodiac profile, but the DNA from the letters, no match.
All that circumstantial stuff, it doesn't mean anything without the physical link. It's frustrating. Then there's Gary Francis Post, the Case Breakers guy. They say they have hair DNA connecting him to Chorizo Bates, plus the anagrams. The FBI is looking into it, so we gotta wait and see if that leads anywhere.
And those are just the two most talked about. There are tons of other names that have come up over the years. Michael O'Hare, named by Gareth Penn, who had this whole ritualistic killings theory. Jack Terrence, suggested by his stepson, but the FBI DNA testing on that one came back inconclusive. Some sailor supposedly confessed to an ex-cop, Robert Tarbox. Richard Gaikowski, because some people thought his voice sounded like the guy making the phone calls. George Hodel, because his own son, Steve Hodel, thought he was connected to the Black Dahlia case. George Russell Tucker, named by Lyndon Lafferty, and a whole convoluted theory about a police cover-up. And then there's Louis Joseph Myers, who apparently confessed to a friend before he died. It's wild, right?
So many different paths people have gone down trying to figure this out. Each suspect has their own little bits of evidence, and then usually there's someone else saying, no, that doesn't fit. Makes it near impossible to say for sure who it was.
And lastly, you can't talk Zodiac without talking about how he's impacted pop culture. He's inspired movies like Dirty Harry and that David Fincher movie Zodiac, which is really well researched. He's been on TV shows, Millennium, Criminal Minds, even American Horror Story. Musicians have written songs about him. He's even in video games like Manhunt 2 and Watch Dogs 2.
He's everywhere. Even Matt Reeves, the guy who directed The Batman a couple years ago, said he based the Riddler on the Zodiac. Crazy how even after all this time, he's still influencing how we tell stories.
So to sum it all up, we've got this guy, still don't know his real name. known as the Zodiac, killed 5 people for sure in Northern California in the late 60s. He sent these cryptic letters, these ciphers, years of investigations, tons of suspects, but no one knows for sure who he was. One of America's biggest unsolved mysteries.
For everyone listening, what makes this so fascinating is how much there is to dig into. The ciphers, they're like giant brain teasers waiting to be solved. All those suspects, all that evidence that might mean something, might not. It's all up for debate, and people are still trying to figure it out. I think that shows how much we all want answers, even for something that happened so long ago. And the way it's become part of our culture shows how powerful this case is, how it still sticks with us.
So here's something to think about. Forensic science, it's come a long way. You've got the official investigators, and then all these amateur detectives, they're not giving up. So is it possible, even now, that we could finally find out who the Zodiac really was? What's that missing piece, that one thing that could unlock the whole thing? Maybe it's been there all along, just waiting to be noticed. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.